My name is Sherry Sontag, and I have what is the most fun and probably the most unusual job at Bloomberg Engineering. Okay, I'm waiting a minute. What is my job? He'll tell me when I can talk again, and I will let you know. I can. I've been asked to come up with an elevator pitch about who I am. That's how unusual it is. I am a journalist in a software shop. My degree is from Columbia University, journalism school. I have published and sold more than 1 million copies, and that is not hyperbole, of a book about submarines and spies during the Cold War. It's investigative journalism. I've also written about law, insider trading, bankruptcy. And a long time ago, I figured out being the outsider, being the person who's not an expert, has given me some real benefits. And the first one is I ask a lot of questions. Well, John Lakos is here. He had a person working for him named Tom Marshall, who met me out of the blue at somebody's memorial. And well, Tom came back and said, I need her. I need her as my first hire on a new team that was doing large scale computer architecture. And the reason he thought he needed me was really the first introduction of system-wide, community-wide rules for how we would name and organize our code base. And people who were used to being very independent, because Bloomberg was sort of raised as 100 startups under one roof, really resented being asked to stop and rethink what they named their code, what libraries they put them in, and everything else. So Tom convinced John, who convinced Sean Edwards, who's now our CTO, who convinced Vladimir Krylyachko, who's now our CEO, that they needed me in there. And I thought I was being asked to write a little bit of documentation. No, I talk tech with an accent. They didn't want me writing their documentation. They wanted me talking to their people. And over the last 19, 20 years, that has evolved to my speaker coaching. Because really, the bottom line is everybody in this room, when you're about to give a talk, you know what you need to do. The problem is we get self-conscious, we get worried, we get in our own way. And I've got to tell you something. I was bloody petrified about this talk. And the reason why is I have coached. I have sat down in a room with Connor and with John and with people who are not in this room, endlessly saying, but why are you telling me this? What is it used for? How does it all gel? And I'm not talking about just the simple questions, but each question leads to the next question, to the next question. I become a journalist in a software shop where I want to understand the issue in all of its complexity, but in a way that we could actually repeat it. And sometimes the questions I end up asking bring new realization to the people who are answering them too. They suddenly understand how it all comes together, and it becomes this collaboration. And one of the things I have noticed when I get to coach talks is the people I coach, sometimes they are so far in the weeds, you don't know why they're telling you something. And it's easy to get people checking their messages because of that. Or sometimes they're so far back that they are so general that there are these amazing experiences and reasons and issues and problems and journey according to about what they've done. And they're too far back. They're trying not to talk about themselves. When they forget it's their experience that makes it matter. It's probably their experience that got them chosen. So I was getting ready to do this and thinking, I've got to do this in the context of giving a good talk. And I started to panic. And I reached out to John Kelb, I reached out to Phil Nash, and I said, okay, you guys must have an idea of what you really think is important here. I was really just making sure that I was not going to go so off the rails that they were going to be embarrassed for having invited me. And I asked the question, what do you love about conferences? So I'm going to have to repeat it, or did they give me a mic that worked yet? I don't remember. Okay, that's okay. You can talk loud. Who would like to tell me, and they're going to run you a mic, what do you love about conferences? Meeting friends. What else? New connections and collaboration. New connections and collaborations. What else? Learning new things? Like the details, exactly how the code base works, or that people are working on things. What are you learning? Okay. So seeing what other people have done to overcome a problem. Anybody else? Seeing where the language is evolving. Okay. Oh, John has one.
Sharing information.
Okay, but what kind of information are you sharing? Are you sharing the
Technical information that I've accumulated from my experiences with the standards committee and working with other people? Typically, that's my primary objective. And now I benefit from of course, meeting people and seeing people is important.
but it's sharing the information and the experience and how things have come together, right? So, how many talks do you hear that punch through that wall, that actually are sharing information, that actually are adding from the text the experience to it? Sometimes not as many as we think, right? Not as many as we want. This is what Phil said. It is something that most speakers have tuned into. It's not really the talks that are the important thing. It's what goes on in between the talks. The talks are important because they feed into that. They help create what you bring into the breaks and into the bar afterwards, what you bring to the connection between you and the friends that you make, that you are thinking along similar lines. So, what does it take to punch through from the hallway track to the lecture rooms? Now, when I first said that to John Kalb, and I said, he's 9 hours earlier than we are right now. So when I was panicking at midnight, he was a really easy person to talk to. We had a Zoom going. He said, but you don't want people to just get up there and yap. Some people are going to really think well, and they're going to want to put everything together. And I'm not asking you not to do that. So I'm going to say right now, if anything I say suggests that I want you to be light, that I don't want you to have depth, that I don't want you to have experience, that's really not it. What I want you to do, though, is think about why you tell a story, what you're trying to get across. Not, oh my God, I know so much and I am in front of these really smart people and I want to show them everything I can. And it's an hour, so I'm going to talk at double speed. And there will be no time for questions, but who cares? But more, what's the most important thing I can tell you? Now, I've got to tell you, there are people who disagree with that. I took a bus at ACCU from Bristol to Heathrow because a few people I knew were taking a bus. And normally I'd just be on the train. And two guys who were speakers looked at me and said, we disagree with you. The talks I love best are unintelligible in the room. The talks I love best are the ones that I've got to go home and read and listen to 4 times and then realize that there's genius in them. And I said, yep, you and maybe one other guy in the room. So I have a proposal for you. When you have that bit of genius, think of your talk as an introduction to it and follow up with a white paper that people can take home with them and chew on. But remember, we're talking, we're in a room, sometimes without any air. This is very different. This is actually lovely, right? And if you want people to stay with you, you are having a conversation. So, and I actually believe, having now been given a track at CPPCon, we're doing a business and career track, that this happens from the moment you write your proposal to the last question. You are being asked to tell a story. You're being asked to have a point of view, to have a focus, to hand people something that they could actually continue to listen to, continue to absorb, and have a conversation about. Understand what your experience needs. So what did I say here? Okay, so what does it take to say that? You need to let people know who you are. You may be the person who wrote the paper that just got through the standards committee. I think Dan Katz is going to have a great talk next year. I'm so excited for him. I've asked him to already do it for business and career. You may be on stage because this is what you do for your day job, or you may be the amateur teaching the expert. And think about that. What does it mean to be the amateur teaching the expert? I have coached some friends who were exactly that. Somebody who just ranges. He was going to CPP Now. He fell in love with the concept of ranges. He wasn't even sure how he was going to use it for his day job. He really wanted to talk about it. What could he do standing in front of the people on the standards committee that worked out the language, the problem, what would be allowed, what wouldn't work? He can tell the guys that gave this out into the world how it was being received, how it was being used. He would have them leaning forward more than anybody else if he remembered who he was and what he brings to the table. Connor was talking to me about concurrency. And in order for me to be able to follow the conversation about concurrency, I want to know what it looks like. I want to know if I turn on the tap, does it turn on the water? Does the water come out? Doesn't mean I don't want to know about the plumbing. It doesn't mean I don't want to know about gravity. It doesn't mean I don't know about the physics behind it. But the first question I will always ask is, what is it for? And it turns out we are a financial services company and we do trading. We do trading information, and the world is a complex place. The kind of software that worked when it was one trade, one stock doesn't work when it's baskets of things related to other instruments being whipped around by the winds of war and avarice and 100 other things that have to go into the equation. C++, we use it at Bloomberg because of its performance. Concurrency means performance, and it's why we're still using it. And now it doesn't mean I don't want him to then talk about how he uses the code and the tricks and the methods. But if he puts it in that context, that's what he's selling, both to our clients, but really to the engineering division, suddenly I'm along for the ride and I am picking up the story and understanding the value. Now, John Kalb said, don't forget, tell people be vulnerable. Now, what does that mean? If you get up and you know everything, and it was so easy, well, either you're missing something or you're forgetting what it took to create it. Part of any good story is a journey. And it's usually the journey where you overcame some obstacles, or you woke up in the middle of the night with an answer, having worked for hours and days trying to figure something out. If the only obstacle is you open the door and you read a book, then what are you doing on stage? But if you're on stage because you really worked with something and you really worked hard to figure it out, or maybe even find a use that nobody else had come up with, that's your story. Again, you could have intensely interesting tech behind it, but take people on the ride with you and don't be afraid to be vulnerable. I was terrified that somebody in this room was going to be like, oh yeah, she's telling me I've got the PhD in, in engineering, and she came as a journalist writing about submarines and law and everything else. I get cowed all the time. It forces me to say, am I right? It forces me to make those extra phone calls. It forces me to go to my colleagues and say, okay, I thought that talk was impossible to understand. I've just been through my third talk on ranges and I don't know what they do. And well, it was the president of our C++ guild who looked at me one day and said, oh yeah, after my third talk on ranges, I finally looked it up. I understand code generation. I understand testing. I work with people on that all the time. Start there. And Herb, by the way, Herb did a really good job today. He hit every one of these buttons. Start there, and you're going to have my attention because I need to understand what you're doing to know where it fits in with what everybody else is doing, to have value for it. The most interesting stories show your journey and the obstacles you had to overcome, didn't we? Okay, so the conversation starts with your proposal. You are, when they do it right, rendered invisible. They take away your name, they take away your company name. So you best be loud. Now, what do I mean about that? I mean, having been part of the review people and actually have been on the help desk for reviewers. Well, when it comes time to judge whether or not the tech is valid, I reach out to friends. Hey, John, would you take a look at something for me? I can't judge this. That's not me. But when it comes to the part where people say why they're telling me and why it matters, I can judge that. These proposals are gauged according to, is the tech interesting? Is what he's saying correct? Does he list so much about, or she, I'm sorry, they, does anybody list so much about what they want to talk to? They can't possibly do it in an hour or 90 minutes or 3 hours or however long they've got and make it interesting. Or is there a point of view? Is there a journey? Is there a point to the talk? And does it need to be said? And by the way, God forbid, please don't be selling your own thing. Even if you are eventually selling your own thing, step back. What made you interested in the first place? What part of this will your friends want to share if they never want to spend a dime? And don't be afraid to be a little obvious. People who come to my talk should walk away looking at things a different way, should walk away with a new appreciation for how things work, should walk away at least knowing the questions to ask. Because when I was reading proposals, and I did skip over the ones I was just not qualified to rate, I wanted to hear that voice. I wanted to hear, is this person going to bring something to the story? Is this person going to bring something to the experience that wasn't obvious? If I'm going to look at a proposal about code review, I want to know something about code review I didn't know before. It's not necessarily be kind to the people you're reviewing. How about, how do you give them value? How do you make it a teaching moment? How do you make it something that the company could do because it becomes useful beyond the question of the pull request? You were talking about that today at breakfast, and that you were thinking that code review would be something that you like to talk about, or you have talked about. I don't remember. Yeah. Can you be not obvious? And by the way, this becomes even harder for stories that aren't digging deep into the code. I'm calling them stories. I'm a journalist. I'm sorry. For talks that aren't just digging deep into the code, because you have to, when you can't lean on the code, you have to find the depth and the experience elsewhere. The track that I am co-chairing is called Business and Career. And we really want people who have thought really, really hard beyond the obvious, beyond the, if you're going to give a talk, come up with a story idea. Beyond, we want people who say, I have been there when people have come out of school and are shell shocked when, and this is a story of how we get them out of it. You need depth, you need experience, you need a story to tell. So how does it work? How many people here have not been part of a review committee for a conference? Oh, okay. A bunch of hands have come up. All right. I actually hadn't been, so I started getting invited after I was a speaker. You end up kind of on a list. I think we could also, if you're interested, I think we're also able to invite people as things are happening. We should find a way to collect, maybe everybody give me, we'll collect emails or something and I could share it with conference owners that there are more people who would be willing. This is how it has worked, at least I'm going to talk for CPP on C because I've been given permission. I don't want to sort of talk for anybody else. There is a software that they've been using lately called Speakerfish. And what it does is it lights up 3 proposals at a time. And these are the parts of the proposal that don't include who you are, where you come from, and what your name is, obviously, where you work. And what you get to do is you get to say, okay, of these 3 proposals in front of me, this is the best, this is second, this is third. You can click on a proposal and say, don't show this to me again. You might do that because you don't think you're qualified all the time. Or you can say, just give me the next set. I'm not going to rank them. But until you say, don't show it to me again, you will still see the proposals compared to different things. And at a certain point, all of those proposals are given a grade. And those grades are visible too. You could comment, reviewers comment. They frequently say, I think the guy is selling something. I don't know if what he's actually wants to talk about. It's a very big topic. He lists so much. I'm not sure how he can manage that. Or this is an important topic and it looks like he's got a point of view. And those comments are seen by the other reviewers. The grades are seen too. And obviously, the top 10, let's say, are going to kind of be a shoo-in, right? And they are usually, that process favors deep dives into tech. It's gonna favor reflections for the next decade, I think. It's also going to favor things that people haven't done. So then there is, by the way, 3 cool things about C++. I have now named it C++ 26. That wins on 2 levels. That wins because it's C++ 26. It also wins because it's 3 things. And you would assume that had this not been a keynote and had there been a detailed outline, it would have said, I'm zeroing in on these 3 things for this reason. That's a kind of a winning, that's going to win the rankings game. But it's not all that happens. There is round 2. And that's where the program committee has a minute to say, how do I create balance at our conference? How do I get, what did I say before? Story, depth, experience, journalism. I may not know. I mean, hell, I had a best-selling book about submarines and spies during the Cold War, covering an era where women were not allowed to be either. How do I know? How can I find people who have something to say that goes beyond clever, that goes beyond cute, that has points of view, maybe from the new student coming in who is trying to make heads or tails of it, given the education system, maybe from the graybeard who has the benefit of experience that says, yes, what's coming in that's new and wonderful is fantastic, but don't throw out what's been working too, or how things come together. Or people who are good at process. New code review systems was a good idea, but also I know Peter Muldoon has a great talk where he talks about project management, but it's not simple. It's really, these are the details you may not realize you have to think about. Those proposals, if you can figure out who you are, why you're telling people something, and show that experience in the short form, you may not get the, oh, this is heavy C++, top grade, but you're likely to get the, this is something we as engineers care about. And that we need this mix in the talk. I promise you, I don't know this for a fact, but I know this for a fact. I did not get the high marks as the heavy C++ hitter that must be here. Somebody said, people need to hear what Sherry has to say about telling a story. That had to have been round 2. And if round 2 is done well, then you are going to get depth. I can tell you that for my track that coming up for business and career, which I believe they just didn't need a track for that here because they look for that specifically. They look for that kind of breadth. But for my track, I know that when I looked at rankings, I looked to say, okay, these guys are going to get to talk anyway. Where's the hidden gem that, given the way the process works, people would skip over? Can I see value in that? And sometimes I actually looked for lower scores if I could see the depth. There's room for that. So that means your voice is that much more important. So 2 lessons here. You can become part of the review process simply by signaling interest. You can also know what it is that people who are picking talks are looking for. They want things to be relevant. And they want things that not everybody would score super high, although the high scores obviously get in too. Okay, so now you're writing your talk. You've gotten chosen. How many people here have gotten chosen? How many people here have spoken? Okay, a large third of you, right? I hope to God you don't do this. I have tried and failed. Don't compose on your slide deck. I think in general, when I teach writing beyond this, and I do a lot, people try to do too much at once. People try to start from the beginning when they're telling a story. It's a problem because you don't know what you're talking about yet. You may think that you do. I'm gonna step away from tech for a minute. The book, Blind Man's Bluff. What are you writing about? Classified information during the Cold War, submarines. But what are you writing about? People really wanted to know. It's chronological, but what are you writing about? It's pearls on a string. We worked 5 years and had an entire draft of that book before we sat down, looked at the pieces, and went, holy, we have just written a book about preventing a reputable harbor in a nuclear age. We didn't have a clue until we saw it all together. So I have learned something. First, when I tried to write from start to finish, I have ADHD. I was like a deer in the headlights. So my co-author started begging me, just write the character sketch, write the moment, write the moment. Who was here? Was everybody here with Herb's talk today? Most of us? Write the walk to the elevator. Write the parts that are standing out in your brain. And don't worry about grammar and don't worry about how you say anything. In fact, don't clean it up when you say something a certain way. Let your voice be there because we can sanitize ourselves too much and it gets boring. The next thing you'll do is you'll look at all of those pieces and say, what's this really about? What really mattered to me? What was standing out to me? And you can start, there could be some beautiful things in there, but they don't fit that line of thought. Get rid of them. People can only absorb too much. And then when you're ready and done with the rest of it, okay, what rule of three? The rule of three is something that I had never actually thought of. I thought of not overdoing it, not saying too much. It was Andre when we were coaching at CPPCon that came up with rule of three, but he's right. And Herb used it today, didn't he? He had 3 things and he repeated, these are going to be the most important. He didn't try to tell you everything because there's only so much anybody could absorb and pay attention to and get any benefit from before you just exhaust them. It doesn't mean you can't drill deep. It doesn't mean you're saying 3 things, but you're covering 3 topics. And it's a good rule of thumb. There's probably room to be a little bit different, but honestly, when my first talk for CPPCon was about namespaces and grabbing community consensus. And I was about to go on to the next thing and I went, God, even I'm sick of myself. This is enough. If you think you're going to chew on your tongue. Yes, John.
I'm waiting for the right moment to say this, and I feel like I've got a full house. In other words, in poker.
Uh-huh.
So when Andrei Alexandrescu was trying to decide what the principles for his talk on how to give a talk, he wanted to come up with 3 things. And he said it was going to be EEE. Do you remember what the 3 E's are?
I do not. I don't think he said EEE to me.
Yes.
8 hours he did.
Okay. So it was engage, entertain, and educate. So I thought that would pertain. Excuse my fraud.
I think it does. And I think that it applies. We want to tell you why things matter. We want to tell you in a way that you can enjoy it, right? Tell you part of the story. And educate, we don't want to be so thin that you're not getting anything out of it. And it's not all story, but it's using story to give you some depth. I think the 3 E's work. I'm going to yell at him for not using it in our class after 8 hours. But we've got another one coming up and it's going to be a 2-day class. So maybe we'll get to it.
Andre is very engaging. He's very entertaining and he's very educated. And that's why he's one of the best speakers ever. Sorry.
Okay. Andre is engaging, entertaining, and educational is what you said.
Right, but then what his course was the 3E course. That's what when they originally came up with it, and he came up with the idea of the 3 E's. I put them in the order that they are now, and he liked it.
You want to know how the class is going to differ from the first one that I gave with Andre, by the way? And I was thinking about this, and he doesn't even know this yet. The class is going to differ. Both he and I talked about what we cared about. He approached it very much like a computer programmer. He had a formula for it, EEE, as it turns out. I approached it more like it was very instinctive. One of the reasons it was hard to talk to you guys today is how do you put instinct into words, into language. One of the things I realized when I do classes that are less tech and more about people just expressing themselves is people will make the same mistakes, whether or not you're getting them in their run through or whether or not you're discussing their idea with them ahead of time. The difference is if I can get people ahead of time, if I could front load, if I could talk to you about what you're trying to do, and you could do this for your friends, guys, then I can get your first draft so much closer. And instead of feeling like you failed, it's utter success. And part of it is I'm going to ask you these questions. What is it about? Can you explain it to me? Why you? I'm going to talk about not just the general concepts, but if you wanted to, if somebody was working an idea out right now, we can go through that exercise. If 5 of you had showed up, I would have grabbed some paper and I would have just done a writing class. That's what I was ready to do because I wasn't sure whether, I never know if I'm going to get 2 people in the room or 200. But this is a nice in between, I promise you. But if you can front load this with people, you can help people think it out. And once they've got that in their brain, they do really well. We had a guild week. What time is it, by the way? How much time do I have? Okay, I have 25 minutes? Okay, we had a guild week seminar. Our guilds, we have professional guilds. We had Sergei Tarsis, who was leading trading systems at the time, or a portion of it, loved history. And when we were trying to think of how can we get people who love different aspects of a language and things together, he came up with the idea of riffing off of the ancient guilds, the ancient crafts guilds. So we call them guilds. And at Guild Week, we had some talks that were going to be really not super language specific. And there's a Java guild and a Python guild and a C++ guild and whatever. And we called them cross-guild talks. The ideas all read really well. And I was lucky because one of the things I love to do is teach. So I created a persistent chat where we call it BB Talks. And I can go in there and anybody can self-join. And you can say, I'm working on an idea. I need a run through. Can somebody listen? And I have a tendency to go, me. And we'll get anywhere from 1 to 6 people actually working with these people. And people who had some of these cross-guild talks were very interested in getting that kind of help. And there was one that was 3 guys talking about grassroots change across teams in a large software house. And they were like, you have to remember in the dry run, you have to sweat the small stuff. Talk to your stakeholders. And after about 20 minutes of this, I went, stop right now. Why are you talking about this? And they had stories about how they had accomplished the impossible by just taking over and saying, I think I can convince people to do something. And what it meant to talk to stakeholders. At one point, it meant getting the machine owners to say, I'm going to rip the software off the machine. So people will break when they try to do the wrong thing. Don't worry, there's another machine that had it. We weren't going to stop Bloomberg from functioning. But how do we get people's attention? How do we get people's buy-in? And it was in the specifics. So I convinced them. I actually, in one case, interviewed the guy and recorded it, transcribed it, and handed him back as transcript. How do you get people to remember that their experience is educational? It's not just talking about them, that the details, when given to them the right way, can be fascinating. And then balance it. Think about whether or not what you're talking about does more than just tell you how your day was yesterday, kind of a thing. Okay, so where are we? Work on your slides when you know what you want to say. They'll illustrate it. But if you haven't spent a lot of time on a lot of slides, you won't be so married to each and every last one that you dive too deeply in. So now you're mic'd and on stage, and you introduce yourself, and you also ask your audience who they are. I did a little bit of that, who's talked, who's reviewed. After CPPCon, the namespace talk went really well. I had a standing room only audience, and the questions went on in front of the room when we got kicked out a half an hour later. And then I went to give the same talk internally at Bloomberg. And I felt like I treated it like it was the same audience, and it wasn't. I was mainly talking not to people who might be clients who might be asked to change their code, but to other infrastructure people. And it landed like a lead balloon. If I had asked who was in the audience, if I had realized that, I could have told the same story more from the process of getting it done and less from, we want to hear what you have to say. We really are willing to change our minds. We will work with you guys. It's consensus in the real form. If you know who you're talking to, it's scary, right? I'm saying change your talk when you arrive, but it's not that different. But if you know who you're talking to, you'll have a better sense of what they're interested in. And if you know what people are interested in, they're going to feed off of you. They're going to nod for you. They're going to lean in. They're going to give you something to rely on. I have a good room here. I've got a lot of people doing that for me today. Sometimes it's only 2 or 3. And I will find those people after and go, thank you. I needed to be talking to somebody. Don't make the mistake of thinking that you know or it's the exact same audience. Find out, because if you could actually talk to people where they live, that conversation is going to feel so much better. Phil wanted me to remind everybody that pauses matter. At this moment, Laura Savino, she did a few keynotes, some lovely conferences. You should catch one. They are recorded. They are about coping with other people's code. She'll stop, point out that you're in charge when you're the guy with the clicker. You can do anything you want. She actually has stopped to take a selfie and has done it well. Okay, slides and demos. So this was going to be a hard one. If you notice, I am not a brilliant slide person. Slides get in my way. I am bad at it. I have come to the conclusion, fighting for this talk, that I have got to take a class or a course or get an instructor in slides. John, I would appreciate help. I do not do slides well.
What you do well is extemporaneous speaking, and that's extremely valuable, and that's why you're here talking. And I think having the very lean slides works for you.
But there needs to be a way, especially if I want to talk about slides. So I could say what Phil said, don't use dark slides. Projectors hate them, and a lot of small conferences use projectors. And font matters. Phil made sure, please tell people font matters. He really wanted me to say that, and he was right. And then I went and I told John, I don't know how else to illustrate slides. And he sent me a slide deck, but I couldn't talk through his slide deck and pull this off. So I grabbed 2, and I have to tell you, one looks really good. And the second one, going from Keynote to Google Slides, did not behave very well. So it's going to look terrible, but it's supposed to be another example of a method you could use for slides. So here's one John Kalb slide, and it's pop-ups. You saw Herb use those today too. If you need to underscore, if you need to highlight something, that works. The next slide should have been like an animation with 3 different things and having the highlight work and move and everything else. Instead, it came out like that. I am bad at slides. But the idea being that you can use highlights. And if I had those all animated, I can click on one thing at a time and different things would have been highlighted there. If you're going to use slides, know how to use them well, make them readable, make them point out what you care about, and don't make people try too hard to look for the information, because you will lose each and every one of them. I was talking to Phil about this, and I said, what about coding live? I think it looks like paint drying. I hate it when people code live. And he said, there's a place for it. And this is the deal. There are times, like if you want to show, if you code here, it's going to look like that on Compiler Explorer, that the instantaneousness of it, the immediacy of it is really the word I was looking for, is going to be pretty good. But if you're going to do it, it's like you're going to get up and do a dance. You are going to choreograph it. You are going to practice it, because it is really, really hard to do it right. One of the reasons I sit there telling people, please don't do this, I have never seen it done right. But if you are willing to figure out exactly how, and then just to the nines, go after it and go after it and go after it. You could do it live or fake it. Just have some slides that are making the changes you would like them to make. There was a young man who wanted to show how something was faster. So, but he wanted people to not wait for it, so he sped it up. So in the end, you saw the clock ended exactly the same way. And I said, you know what? If you really have something that shows speed, start your talk and say, we're gonna let's shoot that one off. And that one's done. I'll let you know when the other one's done. And even if it's 10 minutes later, go, there it is. Figure out what you're trying to show. If you could show it while you're coding live, practice. And if you can't, show what it would have been like. If you need to. It is hard to do well.
Quick point. That point is something that I do differently than most other people do. I will take a very, very busy screen, and then once I've got it exactly the way I want it, it's incomprehensible. I will reverse engineer it backwards to a blank screen over maybe 10 slides. And that way, I'll introduce something and then I'll introduce something else. It'll draw your eye to the thing. You can talk about it. And that way, when the picture is done, instead of using a pointer or something else on one slide that's so busy nobody can understand it, you've actually built it up yourself. I would never try to code something live in my entire life. That would scare the bejesus out of me. But that is the way that I do it. Now I do it with animation. I used to have slide decks that approached 1,000 slides, and now I keep it to 100 and something and use animation.
And this one is like 20, and it was almost 10. We have an editor. His name is Chaim Haas, and he is brilliant. He is as bright as anybody I've ever worked with, and I spent 5 years at the New York Times. I love him. And one of the things he has to do is to copy edit our slides ahead of time. And I was so trying to hold to that. But when I started asking Violetta to maybe print some notes out for me so I could fill in the blanks I realized I needed to get it up there for you too. So I kind of broke Chaim's rule and I got too much happening too late. But the bottom line is slides are hard to do, coding is hard to do, and they take practice. And they really take, why is that up there? Why am I saying this? Why am I bothering people with this? Is this important to remember? So, echoes, chart where you've been, start the next conversation. This came out of a conversation with Phil too, but it works. Think back to Herb one more time. He said, so we have taken you through the compiler change that they're going to get for free, the big deal of reflections and asynchronous coding, right? We've got these things we've gone through, and this is why I was up here. I have that the C++ 26 is going to be fundamentally massive change, right? I am going to tell you, even if all you have to do is say, we're wrapping up, and I really have a little bit of time. Do I have a little bit of time to ask people to tell me their stories about writing? I'm going to wrap up in a minute. And I want you to know that what I've tried to do is tell you that when I'm coaching, these are the things I am trying to get people to do. It is never the case that one person is good at it and another person is not. The best talks I have ever helped bring onto this planet happened because the same person who was stumbling answered those questions, understood the importance of them, and did that. We are, I'm finally going to quote Andre, a species of storytellers. I firmly believe we learn to tell stories before we have language ourselves when we're hearing them. We just get nervous, or we get told that we have to sound a certain way. We get in our own way. We psych ourselves out. We try to do too much at once, or we get shy about saying when things are hard. And if you give yourself permission to just tell it like it is, tell it struggles and all, how it feels, your own language, and don't worry about saying it the right way, you're going to be compelling. And you are the same person who could have come out with a talk that fell flat. Sometimes you'll do both. I have put a room full of spies to sleep, telling them classified information, just because I did too much of it. So all of you can do this, because I've never met anybody who can't. I have the best job at Bloomberg. I get to ask people questions. I get to get them talking to one another. And thank God they want to talk to me. So I got to ask you, okay, from your proposal through the last question, this is all a conversation. Yep, echo, there's an echo. What would you like to ask me or what would you like to tell me about? We have a microphone floating around.